August 19th, 1944, East Prussia, Hitler's wolf's lair. The maps told a story every German officer wanted to believe. Across the vast war room inside Hitler's headquarters, red arrows pushed relentlessly eastward across France. American armored spearheads had broken out of Normandy with shocking speed, carving through German defenses and leaving chaos in their wake. Yet beneath the panic spreading to the Western Front, there remained one comforting certainty: mathematics. And mathematics, unlike soldiers, could not be intimidated. General Oberst Alfred Jodl stood over the latest intelligence reports and studied the numbers carefully. Fuel consumption, supply tonnage, vehicle losses, distance from depots, road capacity. Every figure pointed toward the same conclusion. The Americans had gone too far. Patton's Third Army had advanced hundreds of miles in barely a month. His tanks raced forward faster than any Allied planner had anticipated. Entire German formations had been bypassed, surrounded, or simply left behind. But speed had a cost, a devastating cost. Fuel. Every Sherman tank consumed gasoline at a staggering rate. Every artillery battery devoured ammunition by the ton. Every mile gained increased the burden on already strained supply lines. The Americans now stood more than 400 miles from their Normandy supply bases. No army in history had maintained such momentum at such distances. No army, not Napoleon, not the Kaiser, not even the Wehrmacht itself. The Germans knew this because they had learned the lesson firsthand. In Russia, their own blitzkrieg had eventually stalled not because Soviet resistance suddenly became unbeatable, but because German logistics had reached its breaking point. Trucks failed, fuel disappeared, railways ended. Horse-drawn wagons could no longer keep pace. Victory had outrun supply. Now the Americans appeared to be making the exact same mistake. Jodl's calculations suggested Patton could continue advancing for only a matter of days, perhaps hours. Sooner or later, his tanks would run dry, his trucks would stop, his offensive would freeze in place. And when it did, Germany would finally have a chance to recover. Fresh defensive lines could be established along the Seine. Reserve formations could be reorganized. A stable front might emerge before winter. For the first time in weeks, there was reason for cautious optimism. But while German commanders congratulated themselves on their understanding of military science, something extraordinary was already happening beyond their field of vision. 125 miles away, thousands of engines roared through the darkness. A seemingly endless stream of trucks moved eastward along French roads. Headlights burned brightly through the night. There was no camouflage, no blackout discipline, no attempt to conceal their movement. Vehicle after vehicle rolled forward in a continuous river of steel. 5,958 trucks, 23,000 drivers, more than 12,000 tons of cargo moving every 24 hours. The operation violated every principle German logistics officers considered sacred, and that was precisely why they failed to understand it. The Americans were building something unprecedented, not a convoy, not a supply route, not even a transportation network. They were creating an industrial machine dedicated entirely to feeding a moving army. Its name was the Red Ball Express, and within 72 hours, it would change the course of the war. The confidence inside German headquarters was not born from arrogance alone. It was rooted in experience. The Wehrmacht had spent years perfecting modern warfare. German officers understood supply better than almost anyone on earth. They had pioneered blitzkrieg. They had mastered combined arms operations. They had shattered entire nations through speed and coordination. Yet throughout every campaign, one truth remained constant. Logistics ruled everything. Armies moved on fuel. Tanks moved on fuel. Victory moved on fuel. Without supply, even the most brilliant offensive became nothing more than a collection of stranded vehicles. German commanders had watched it happen repeatedly in North Africa, in Russia, in Italy. Again and again, logistics determined success or failure. When intelligence officers calculated American supply requirements in August 1944, the results seemed impossible. An armored division consumed approximately 1,000 tons of supplies every day. An infantry division required hundreds more. Patton commanded 12 divisions spread across a 60-mile front. The numbers became staggering. 12,000 tons daily. Every day, every mile deeper into France increased the challenge. Road networks had been damaged, bridges destroyed, railroads crippled, distances expanded relentlessly. German analysts calculated every variable they could identify. The conclusion never changed. The Americans were approaching collapse. General der Panzertruppe Otto von Manschenfeld wrote in July, "The Americans faced the same impossibility we encountered in Russia. Mechanical armies consume resources faster than they can be delivered. Their current pace cannot continue." Other officers reached identical conclusions. Fuel will become the decisive factor, not tactics, not courage, not battlefield brilliance. Fuel. And according to every available calculation, the Americans were running out of road. August 25, 1944. A requisitioned French chateau. Inside a crowded room filled with exhausted officers, Lieutenant Colonel Loren Ayres faced a logistical nightmare. The Allied advance had become too successful. Patton's forces were moving faster than planners had ever anticipated. Traditional supply methods were breaking apart under the strain. Railways could not keep up. Depots could not keep up. Scheduled transportation systems could not keep up. Everything was falling behind. If nothing changed, Patton would stop. Not because of German resistance, because of simple mathematics. Ayres understood that conventional solutions no longer mattered. The situation required something entirely different, something radical, something that ignored established doctrine. He addressed the room. "Gentlemen, we're going to create a one-way highway." The officers exchanged skeptical looks. Ayres continued, "Every truck runs continuously." No reaction. 20 hours out of 24. Now they stared. No stopping except fuel and emergencies. Silence. "We move 12,500 tons every day." The room erupted. According to every logistics manual ever written, the proposal was impossible. Yet impossible had become the new standard of the Allied advance. The name came from railroad terminology. A red ball shipment meant absolute priority. Nothing delayed it. Nothing interfered with it. Nothing mattered more. The new operation would function exactly the same way. Absolute priority. No exceptions. No excuses. The Red Ball Express had been born. Building the impossible. The concept sounded insane. The execution sounded worse. 2 parallel roads would be designated. One for loaded trucks moving east. One for empty trucks returning west. Traffic would never stop. Convoys would depart every 5 minutes. Drivers would maintain average speeds of 35 miles per hour. Military police would remove slow vehicles from the route. Maintenance teams would operate directly on the roadside. Fuel points would be established at regular intervals. Everything would run 24 hours a day, every day, without interruption. German logistics experts later studied the system and concluded it violated nearly every accepted principle of military transportation. That was true, and it worked. Within 36 hours, the impossible became reality. Thousands of trucks rolled onto French roads. Drivers climbed into GMC CCKW trucks, the legendary Deuce and a Half. Cargo filled every available space. Artillery shells, fuel, medical supplies, food, spare parts. Everything Patton needed to continue advancing. Everything Germany believed could not be delivered. The race had begun, and neither side yet understood that modern warfare was about to change forever. Before dawn, engines thundered to life across western France. Thousands of truck drivers climbed into their vehicles, adjusted their helmets, checked their cargo manifests, and prepared for a mission unlike anything attempted in military history. Most had no idea they were about to become part of a legend. The first convoys of the Red Ball Express rolled eastward carrying fuel, artillery shells, food, medical supplies, spare parts, and everything else an advancing army required to survive. Ahead of them stretched hundreds of miles of damaged roads. Behind them stood an entire Allied offensive balanced on their shoulders. Failure was not an option. Patton's army was moving too fast. Every mile gained created new logistical demands. Every hour mattered. Every truck mattered. Every driver mattered. And among those drivers was a reality that would have shocked many Germans. Approximately 75% of the men operating the Red Ball Express were African American soldiers in a segregated army, in a segregated America. Men who often could not eat in the same restaurants as white soldiers back home. Men who frequently received less recognition despite carrying equal responsibility. Now they were being asked to sustain the most important military advance in Europe, and they delivered. The road quickly developed its own culture. The official regulations existed. The drivers created their own. Speed mattered more than comfort. Movement mattered more than procedure. Results mattered more than appearances. Within days, slogans began appearing across truck bumpers and doors. Patton's Blood Bank. Hitler, here we come. Detroit to Berlin Express. Keep 'em rolling. The trucks themselves became symbols of American determination. Dust-covered, overloaded, often damaged, always moving. If a vehicle broke down, drivers did not wait patiently for assistance. They pushed it aside. If a truck blocked traffic, it became everyone's problem. If a repair could not be completed immediately, the vehicle was abandoned and the convoy continued. The mission came first. Everything else came second. Within 48 hours, German reconnaissance units began reporting something they had never seen before. Observers overlooking key roads watched endless columns of American trucks moving eastward. Day, night, rain, sunshine. It never stopped. Reports flooded headquarters. Continuous vehicle movement observed. Headlights visible for miles. No blackout discipline. Estimate 1,000 vehicles per hour. German officers reading these reports initially assumed exaggeration. Surely no army would operate that way. Surely no commander would expose valuable supply vehicles so openly. Surely the Americans understood the danger. Yet the reports continued. The convoys kept coming. The trucks kept rolling. The supply flow never seemed to diminish. To German planners, the entire operation looked insane. And that was precisely what made it effective. German military doctrine emphasized efficiency. Every vehicle had a purpose. Every gallon of fuel mattered. Every truck represented valuable resources. American doctrine approached the problem differently. The United States possessed something Germany increasingly lacked: abundance. The Americans did not plan around scarcity. They planned around volume. If some trucks broke down, others replaced them. If fuel consumption increased, more fuel arrived. If maintenance requirements grew, additional mechanics appeared. The Germans were trying to solve logistical equations. The Americans were overwhelming them with industrial arithmetic. General Lieutenant Edgar Feutinger watched the growing traffic flow with disbelief. His report described an enemy supply system unlike anything he had ever encountered. The Americans moved with complete confidence. They did not hide. They did not disperse. They behaved as though logistics itself had become invulnerable. For a military educated on European principles, the sight was almost incomprehensible. During the first week of operations, the Red Ball Express exceeded nearly every projection. Nearly 90,000 tons of supplies reached the front. Daily deliveries averaged more than 12,000 tons. Thousands of vehicles completed continuous round trips between Normandy and the advancing armies. Fuel consumption reached staggering levels. The operation itself burned hundreds of thousands of gallons every day. German analysts captured fragments of these figures through intelligence reports. Many dismissed them as propaganda. The numbers appeared impossible. No transportation system should have been capable of such output. No military operation should have functioned at such scale. Yet the evidence continued accumulating. American forces were not slowing down. They were accelerating. As traffic increased, breakdowns became constant. Every day, hundreds of vehicles suffer mechanical failures. Engines overheated. Transmissions failed. Tires exploded. Brakes wore out. Any conventional logistics network would have collapsed under such pressure. The Red Ball Express adapted. Mechanics established roadside repair stations. Maintenance crews learned to diagnose problems within minutes. Vehicles received rapid treatment. 15 minutes. Repair it or remove it. No delays. No debates. No paperwork. A truck that could not move immediately became spare parts for another vehicle. Engines were swapped directly beside the road. Cannibalized components kept healthy vehicles operating. Improvisation became standard procedure. German officers watching this process struggled to understand what they were seeing. To them, it looked like chaos. To the Americans, it looked like efficiency. Perhaps the greatest mystery for German intelligence involved fuel. The Red Ball Express consumed extraordinary quantities of gasoline. The operation required fuel simply to transport fuel. The logic seemed absurd, yet American vehicles never appeared to run dry. The answer lay beneath the English Channel. While the Red Ball Express captured attention on French roads, another engineering achievement remained largely invisible. Operation Pluto. Pipelines under the ocean. Fuel flowed through underwater pipelines connecting Britain to continental Europe. Additional fuel dumps appeared throughout France. Tanker convoys operated continuously. Forward storage sites expanded daily. The result was astonishing. American forces possessed access to fuel on a scale Germany could barely imagine. General Walter Warlimont examined aerial reconnaissance photographs, showing fuel storage areas larger than some German strategic reserves. The implications were terrifying. This was not simply a military advantage. It was an industrial advantage, and industrial advantages were much harder to defeat. The true impact of the Red Ball Express became visible at the front. German doctrine assumed armored divisions could advance 20 to 30 miles per day under ideal circumstances. Patton shattered those assumptions. His formations routinely exceeded those figures, sometimes dramatically. One armored division advanced 35 miles during morning operations, stopped briefly to refuel, then advanced another 30 miles before nightfall. Such speeds destroyed German planning. Defensive positions were bypassed before they could be completed. Reserve units arrived too late. Counterattacks struck empty roads. Everything happened faster than anticipated. German commanders increasingly realized they were no longer fighting an enemy constrained by traditional logistics. They were fighting an enemy whose logistics were becoming a weapon. For many German soldiers, the Red Ball Express became something they experienced before they fully understood it. They heard it at night, in the distance, a constant rumble. Thousands of engines, never stopping, never slowing, always moving. The sound carried across fields and forests. It echoed through villages. It drifted across defensive positions. Some soldiers compared it to a river. Others described it as thunder. Many eventually associated the noise with something more disturbing: inevitability. Every truck represented ammunition. Every truck represented fuel. Every truck represented another day of Allied momentum. The convoys became psychological warfare without intending to. German troops knew what the sound meant. The Americans were receiving everything they needed. While German units increasingly rationed ammunition, fuel, and food, the enemy seemed supplied without limit. The contrast damaged morale more effectively than propaganda. By early September, German intelligence finally accepted a painful truth. The Americans were not approaching logistical collapse. They had solved the problem. The anticipated breakdown had not occurred. Patton had not stopped. The supply system had not failed. Instead, the Red Ball Express had transformed logistics from a limitation into an advantage. What German planners believed impossible had become reality, and the consequences were only beginning. Because as impressive as the first days of the operation had been, the Red Ball Express was about to grow even larger. far larger than anyone in Germany believed possible. At first, German commanders believed they were witnessing a temporary phenomenon, a desperate ally gamble, a logistical surge that would eventually exhaust itself. No transportation network could maintain such pressure indefinitely. No army could consume resources at that scale forever. At least, that was what decades of military experience suggested. But every morning brought new intelligence reports, and every report delivered the same unsettling message. The Americans were not slowing down. They were accelerating. Inside Army Group B headquarters, officers spread aerial reconnaissance photographs across conference tables. The images revealed something disturbing. Supply depots multiplied almost overnight. Fuel dumps appeared where empty fields had existed days earlier. Maintenance centers emerged beside roads. Bridges destroyed by retreating German engineers somehow reappeared within hours. Entire transportation hubs materialized seemingly from nowhere. The speed of construction defied comprehension. German planners had spent years perfecting military engineering. They knew how long these projects should take. The Americans ignored those timelines. If a bridge was destroyed, they built another. If a road became congested, they created an alternate route. If a depot became insufficient, they expanded it immediately. The process resembled industrial production more than military logistics. For German officers trained in meticulous planning, the realization was unsettling. The enemy wasn't merely solving problems. The enemy was overwhelming them. General Walter Model studied the growing intelligence summaries with increasing concern. The reports described a military force operating according to principles entirely different from those practiced in Europe. German warfare had always been built around efficiency, maximum results from limited resources. Every shell counted. Every vehicle mattered. Every gallon of fuel had to be justified. The Americans approached war differently. They fought with abundance. Where Germans conserved resources, Americans consumed them. Where Germans optimized, Americans expanded. Where Germans accepted limits, Americans attempted to eliminate them altogether. The difference wasn't tactical. It was civilizational. Model reportedly summarized the problem in a single sentence. We are not fighting an army. We are fighting an economy. The observation would prove prophetic. By early September, the Red Ball Express had settled into an extraordinary rhythm. Convoys departed every few minutes. Drivers covered hundreds of miles each trip. Thousands of vehicles remained in motion simultaneously. Cargo volumes continued increasing. The operation had become a living machine, and like any machine operating at maximum output, parts constantly failed. Hundreds of trucks broke down every day. Thousands of tires required replacement every week. Engines wore out, axles snapped, transmissions failed. Yet somehow, the system never stopped. German observers watched with disbelief. In their experience, such losses should have crippled operations. Instead, the Americans simply absorbed them. Damaged vehicles disappeared. Replacement vehicles appeared. The flow continued uninterrupted. It was as though logistics losses had become irrelevant. For a military accustomed to scarcity, the concept was almost unimaginable. German reconnaissance aircraft continued flying over Red Ball routes whenever possible. Pilots returned with astonishing reports. Columns of trucks stretched beyond the horizon. Roads seemed alive with movement. Every photograph revealed more vehicles than expected. Every flight produced higher estimates. At first, intelligence officers suspected counting errors. Eventually, they stopped questioning the numbers. The numbers were real. Some roads carried traffic 24 hours a day. Headlights illuminated entire stretches of countryside after sunset. The routes glowed in the darkness like rivers of light. German soldiers stationed nearby described the phenomenon repeatedly. You could hear the trucks before you saw them. You could hear them long after they disappeared. The sound became constant, a mechanical heartbeat driving Allied momentum forward. Fuel remained the greatest source of German disbelief. The Red Ball Express consumed incredible quantities simply to sustain itself. The operation burned enough gasoline each day to support entire German formations, yet supply never appeared constrained. New fuel dumps emerged continuously. Tanker convoys operated around the clock. Storage facilities expanded faster than German planners believed possible. Capture intelligence documents painted an even more alarming picture. American fuel reserves exceeded many German projections by enormous margins. Entire stockpiles existed solely to guarantee uninterrupted movement. If one depot ran low, another replaced it. If transportation distances increased, additional infrastructure appeared. The Americans treated fuel shortages not as a possibility to manage, but as a problem to eliminate entirely. The contrast with Germany's increasingly desperate fuel situation could not have been more dramatic. The front line reflected the consequences. Patton's Third Army continued moving at speeds German commanders considered unrealistic. Entire defensive plans collapsed because they depended upon assumptions that no longer applied. German staff officers repeatedly estimated where American spearheads should stop. The Americans kept going. New defensive positions were prepared. The Americans bypassed them. Counterattacks were organized. The Americans appeared somewhere else. Every calculation based on traditional logistics failed. Every prediction based on previous campaigns proved wrong. German commanders gradually recognized a painful reality. The limiting factor no longer belonged to the Americans. It belonged to Germany. The Wehrmacht was slowing down. The Allies were not. While German commanders struggled to understand the system, the men keeping alive paid a brutal price. Drivers operated under extreme conditions. Many worked for days with little sleep. Dust coated their faces. Exhaust fumes filled the air. Mechanical failures occurred constantly. Accidents became inevitable. Convoys collided in darkness. Vehicles overturned on damaged roads. Engines caught fire. Some drivers were killed. Others were injured. Most climbed back into trucks and continued working because every delivery mattered. Every delay mattered. Every hour mattered. They understood that somewhere ahead, soldiers were waiting for what they carried: fuel, food, medical supplies, ammunition. The war moved because they moved. And despite exhaustion, despite danger, despite segregation within their own army, they kept driving. The composition of the Red Ball Express created another problem for Germany, one that could not be solved through military planning. Nazi racial doctrine insisted African Americans were inferior, yet the logistical miracle unfolding across France depended heavily upon African American soldiers. German intelligence officers noticed. German prisoners noticed. German commanders noticed. The contradiction became impossible to ignore. Thousands of black drivers were performing one of the most important operational missions of the war. They operated complex transportation systems, managed cargo distribution, solved logistical crises, kept entire armies moving, and they were succeeding. Every mile traveled represented another challenge to Nazi racial theories. Every successful convoy represented another piece of evidence those theories were wrong. For some German observers, the realization was deeply unsettling. Reality was destroying ideology. By the second week of September, German intelligence completed its most comprehensive assessment of the Red Ball Express. The findings were devastating. The operation was not temporary. It was not collapsing. It was not slowing down. It had become self-sustaining. Worse still, it was expanding. Every prediction made in August had failed. Every assumption required revision. Every logistical model needed replacement. The Americans had achieved something German planners believed impossible. They had transformed logistics into offensive power. The implications extended far beyond France. If the United States could sustain armies at these distances, if it could replace losses as quickly, if it could maintain this level of movement indefinitely, then Germany faced a problem no battlefield victory could solve. The enemy's greatest weapon was no longer a tank, or a bomber, or an artillery piece. It was an industrial system capable of replacing everything faster than Germany could destroy it. And that realization was beginning to spread through every level of the German command structure. For the first time, Many officers began asking a question they had never seriously considered before. Not how to stop the Allied advance, but whether it could be stopped at all. By early September, the Red Ball Express had become something far greater than its creators had imagined. What began as an emergency solution was evolving into the largest mobile supply system the European battlefield had ever witnessed. Every day, the operation grew. Every day, more trucks joined the road. Every day, more supplies reached the front. And every day, German assumptions died another death. The roads of France no longer resembled military supply routes. They resembled industrial assembly lines. Convoys departed with mechanical precision. Loaded trucks moved east. Empty trucks moved west. Military police enforced movement relentlessly. Traffic never paused. At any given moment, thousands of vehicles occupied the network. Drivers learned every curve, every village, every dangerous bridge, every fuel stop. The route developed its own rhythm. A rhythm measured not in hours or days, but in tonnage. The objective was simple. Keep everything moving. Always TO German observers. The operation appeared reckless. Vehicles traveled overloaded. Drivers ignored traditional rest schedules. Repairs were improvised. Traffic regulations were constantly bent. Yet the more rules the Americans broke, the faster the system seemed to move. A broken truck wasn't treated as a crisis. It was treated as an inconvenience. If a repair took too long, another vehicle took its place. If a route became congested, an alternative route appeared. If a bridge was destroyed, engineers created a temporary crossing. The Americans solved problems through momentum, not perfection. German doctrine valued efficiency. American doctrine increasingly valued continuity. The difference was enormous. Every day brought new breakdowns. Thousands of moving vehicles guaranteed it. Engines failed. Tires exploded. Axles cracked. Brakes wore out. Normally, such attrition would cripple an operation. Instead, Red Ball mechanics transformed maintenance into a battlefield weapon. Repair teams operated directly beside roads. Mobile workshops followed the convoys. Spare parts traveled constantly. Entire engines were swapped in astonishingly short periods. Vehicles deemed beyond repair became sources of replacement components. Nothing useful was wasted. Nothing delayed movement. A truck did not need to be perfect. It only needed to keep rolling to be why mid-September, the statistics began sounding fictional. Thousands of vehicles, millions of miles traveled, tens of thousands of tons delivered, fuel consumption measured in extraordinary quantities. German intelligence officers repeatedly reviewed the reports. Many simply refused to believe them. The numbers violated everything they understood about military logistics. No European army had ever operated at such scale. No European economy could have sustained it. Yet America could, and that was the heart of the problem. The Red Ball Express was not simply demonstrating military power. It was demonstrating industrial power. The difference mattered, because industrial power could replace losses indefinitely. German commanders increasingly found themselves confronting a frightening possibility. Perhaps they had misunderstood the enemy from the beginning. For years, Nazi propaganda portrayed Americans as soft, materialistic, dependent on machines, unwilling to endure hardship. The Red Ball Express exposed those assumptions as fantasy. The drivers endured extraordinary conditions. Many operated with minimal sleep. Many spent days on the road. Many accepted risks that conventional military doctrine discouraged. Yet they continued. Again and again, day after day, the operation demanded tremendous endurance, and the men delivered at the front. The effects were unmistakable. German defensive plans depended on time. Time to regroup. Time to reorganize. Time to establish new lines. The Red Ball Express denied them all three. Fuel reached Patton. Ammunition reached Patton. Food reached Patton. Replacement parts reached Patton. As a result, Patton kept moving. The speed of the American advance shattered calculations throughout the German command structure. Positions prepared for tomorrow were attacked today. Counterattacks arrived after the Americans had already moved beyond them. Entire sectors became unstable. Everything happened faster than expected. German soldiers spoke increasingly about the trucks, not the tanks, not the aircraft, the trucks. At night, they could hear them. A distant growl, a constant vibration. The sound never seemed to stop. Some veterans later described the experience as psychologically exhausting. The trucks represented something impossible to ignore. Every engine meant supplies. Every supply meant another offensive. Every offensive meant more retreat. The noise became a symbol, an audible reminder that America possessed resources Germany could no longer match. The backbone of the operation remained its drivers, and most of those drivers were African American. The irony was impossible to miss. In a segregated military, black soldiers were sustaining one of the most important military operations of the war. Many had been denied opportunities in civilian life. Many had faced discrimination at home. Yet here on the roads of France, they became indispensable. Their performance forced uncomfortable questions. Questions inside the U.S. Army. Questions inside Germany. Questions throughout the world. The success of the Red Ball Express challenged every racist assumption promoted by Nazi ideology. The evidence rolled past in thousands of trucks every day. It could not be ignored by late September. German commanders understood something fundamental. The problem was no longer Patton. The problem was not a particular division, not a particular tank, not a particular battlefield. The problem was America itself, its factories, its roads, its fuel, its production, its ability to create systems on a scale Germany simply could not replicate. The Red Ball Express became proof that the United States had transformed industry into military power, proof that logistics had become a weapon, proof that modern warfare was changing before their eyes. German planners had spent years studying strategy. They had mastered maneuver warfare. They had pioneered blitzkrieg. Yet none of those achievements solved the problem now confronting them. The Americans could replace losses faster than Germany could inflict them. They could move supplies farther than Germany believed possible. They could absorb inefficiency and still outperform carefully optimized systems. For many officers, the realization was devastating. The war was no longer being decided solely by generals. It was being decided by production lines, by truck factories, by fuel pipelines, by transportation networks. The battlefield had expanded far beyond the front, and Germany was losing on every level. As September drew to a close, the Red Ball Express continued operating at full speed. Thousands of drivers remained on the road. Thousands of mechanics kept vehicles moving. Thousands of soldiers unloaded cargo destined for advancing armies. The system was exhausting, expensive, messy, inefficient by traditional standards, and utterly unstoppable. What German commanders were witnessing was not merely a supply operation. It was the future of warfare, a future in which logistics would determine strategy, a future in which industrial capacity would outweigh tactical brilliance, a future in which armies would live or die based on their ability to sustain momentum. The Red Ball Express had become the clearest example of that future, and before the war ended, the world would learn just how decisive that lesson truly was. By October 1944, the Red Ball Express had become a victim of its own success. The operation was never intended to last this long. It had been conceived as an emergency solution, a temporary bridge between the Normandy beaches and the rapidly advancing front. Yet what was supposed to sustain Allied momentum for a matter of days had already been running for weeks. Every mile gained by Patton's forces increased the strain. Every additional advance stretched the network farther. Drivers were exhausted. Vehicles were wearing out at astonishing rates. Road surfaces had been battered by millions of tons of traffic. Even the seemingly limitless resources of the American war machine were beginning to feel the pressure. The round trip for many convoys now exceeded 700 miles. Some drivers spent more time behind the wheel than in bed. Others operated in a haze of exhaustion that blurred the line between determination and survival. Still, the trucks kept moving. That was what mattered. Every delay risked slowing the advance. Every interruption risked giving the Germans precious time. And time had become the most valuable commodity on the battlefield. German intelligence finally noticed signs of strain. Reports arriving at headquarters suggested convoy spacing had increased. Average vehicle speeds had fallen. Maintenance demands were growing. For the first time, some officers believed their original predictions might finally prove correct. Perhaps the Americans had reached the limit after all. Perhaps the great supply machine was beginning to break. But once again, the Americans responded faster than expected. New transfer depots were established. Additional maintenance facilities appeared closer to the front. Driver rotation systems expanded. Fresh vehicles entered service. Routes were reorganized. Within days, the crisis had been transformed into another demonstration of adaptability. Tonnage deliveries increased again. The very pressure that should have broken the system merely forced it to evolve. German commanders watched in frustration. Every weakness they identified seemed to disappear before it could be exploited. Every vulnerability generated another innovation. It was as though the Americans treated problems not as obstacles, but as instructions. If something failed, they changed it. If something slowed down, they expanded it. If something became inefficient, they overwhelmed the inefficiency with additional resources. The result was a supply network that behaved less like a military operation and more like a living organism. It adapted continuously. It learned continuously. And it refused to stop. As the campaign progressed, another American advantage emerged. Transport aircraft began supplementing the flow of supplies. C-47 cargo planes carried critical materials directly to forward areas. Fuel, medical supplies, ammunition, replacement parts, everything that might otherwise be delayed by road congestion. German officers struggled to comprehend the scale. The Luftwaffe, once the terror of Europe, could no longer challenge Allied air superiority in any meaningful way. The Americans moved supplies by road, by rail, and increasingly by air. Every method reinforced the others. Every method multiplied the effectiveness of the entire system. The logistical web became almost impossible to disrupt. German commanders had spent years mastering operational maneuver. They understood how to defeat armies. They understood how to exploit weaknesses. But they had no answer for an enemy capable of generating solutions faster than problems appeared. That realization spread steadily through the German officer corps. Many had entered the war believing military excellence could compensate for material disadvantages. Now they were witnessing the opposite. Material superiority had become military excellence. Factories were winning battles. Assembly lines were shaping campaigns. Truck production was influencing strategy. The implications reached far beyond France. The Red Ball Express demonstrated a new reality of modern warfare. Victory no longer belonged solely to the side with better tactics. Victory increasingly belonged to the side capable of sustaining momentum, the side capable of replacing losses, the side capable of moving resources across enormous distances without interruption. For Germany, this was a terrifying lesson. Its economy was shrinking. Its fuel reserves were collapsing. Its transportation network was under constant attack. Its industrial capacity was falling behind. Meanwhile, the United States seemed capable of expanding indefinitely. New trucks arrived continuously. Replacement drivers entered service. Fresh supplies poured into Europe. The imbalance became impossible to ignore. Some German officers later admitted that the Red Ball Express affected morale as much as any battlefield defeat. Soldiers at the front could hear the evidence. Every passing convoy reminded them that the enemy possessed resources beyond comparison. Every truck represented another reason the war might continue. Every truck represented another reason Germany might lose. The psychological burden accumulated slowly. Then, all at once, many German veterans later described the sensation as fighting a force that never became weaker. No matter how much damage was inflicted, more equipment appeared. No matter how many vehicles were destroyed, replacements arrived. No matter how far the front moved, supplies somehow followed. The Americans had achieved something previous military powers rarely managed. They had turned logistics into an offensive weapon. As autumn deepened, rail lines gradually returned to service. American engineers reconstructed tracks at astonishing speed. Bridges were repaired. Rail yards reopened. Locomotives resumed operation. The burden carried by the Red Ball Express slowly began to decrease. The emergency that created it was finally passing. Yet the operation continued to prove its value until the very end. For 82 days, the trucks had sustained the Allied advance. For 82 days, drivers, mechanics, engineers, military police, and logistics personnel had kept one of history's greatest military offensives moving. They had delivered hundreds of thousands of tons of supplies. They had covered millions of miles. They had transformed a desperate logistical gamble into one of the defining achievements of the Second World War. And although the operation would eventually end, its impact was only beginning to be understood. The greatest lesson of the Red Ball Express was not that trucks could move supplies. Armies had always known that. The lesson was that logistics itself could determine strategy, that transportation could shape campaigns, that industrial capacity could outweigh tactical brilliance. The men who created the operation did not set out to revolutionize warfare. They simply needed to keep Patton moving. But in doing so, they revealed a truth that military planners around the world would study for generations. The future belonged to those who could sustain momentum, and few organizations in history had demonstrated that principle more dramatically than the Red Ball Express. As October progressed, the Red Ball Express began approaching the end of its historic mission. What had started as a desperate emergency measure had evolved into the most successful supply operation of the European campaign. By this point, the Germans fully understood the threat they faced. The problem was no longer Patton's tanks or Allied air power. It was the endless stream of fuel, ammunition, food, and equipment that allowed those forces to keep advancing without pause. Despite mechanical breakdowns, exhausted drivers, and roads pushed beyond their limits, the convoy system continued functioning. Whenever a problem emerged, American logistics officers adapted, creating new routes, repair stations, and supply points almost overnight. For German commanders, the realization was devastating. They had built their military doctrine around operational brilliance and battlefield maneuver. The Americans had demonstrated that industrial power could be just as decisive as tactical genius. As rail lines across France were repaired and returned to service, the need for the Red Ball Express gradually diminished. Trains could now carry larger quantities of cargo more efficiently, reducing the burden on the truck convoys that had carried the Allied advance for nearly 3 months. When the operation finally ended in November 1944, its achievements were staggering. More than 400,000 tons of supplies had been delivered. Thousands of trucks had operated day and night across France. Millions of miles had been driven. Entire armies had remained in motion because of the efforts of a largely unseen force of drivers, mechanics, engineers, and support personnel. Among the most remarkable aspects of the operation was the role played by African-American soldiers. In a segregated military, they had become the backbone of one of the most important logistical achievements in modern warfare. Their performance challenged both Nazi racial ideology and long-held prejudices within the United States itself. Looking back, many German officers admitted that the Red Ball Express changed their understanding of war. It proved that victory in the industrial age depended not only on courage or strategy, but on the ability to sustain armies across vast distances. The trucks of the Red Ball Express did more than carry supplies. They carried momentum. They carried victory. And in many ways, they carried the Allied armies all the way to Germany's doorstep. When the Red Ball Express finally came to an end in November 1944, the roads of France grew quieter. The endless convoys disappeared. The streams of headlights faded into history. The trucks that thundered across the countryside for 82 relentless days were reassigned, redistributed, or replaced by the expanding rail network now feeding the Allied advance. To many soldiers, it felt like the closing of a remarkable chapter. To military historians, it marked the beginning of a revolution. Only after the war did the full significance of the operation become clear. For years, military thinkers had focused on battles, on generals, on tactics, on weapons. The Red Ball Express forced them to confront a different reality. None of those things mattered if an army could not be supplied. No brilliant maneuver mattered without fuel. No armored breakthrough mattered without ammunition. No victory could be exploited without transportation. The trucks had proven that logistics was not merely support. Logistics was power. Captured German officers spent countless hours studying American supply operations after the war. Many reached the same conclusion. Germany had entered the conflict believing military skill could compensate for limited resources. The United States demonstrated the opposite. Resources, properly organized and delivered, could create military advantages impossible to overcome through tactics alone. Former German commanders who had once dismissed American military capabilities now spoke openly about their admiration for the logistical systems they had witnessed. Several admitted that the Red Ball Express shattered assumptions that had guided German planning throughout the war. They had expected Allied advances to stall. They had expected supply shortages. They had expected distance to become an obstacle. Instead, the Americans transformed distance into a challenge that could simply be solved. One German officer summarized it bluntly. We prepared for American tanks. We prepared for American aircraft. We prepared for American artillery. We did not prepare for American logistics. That realization echoed throughout military circles long after the fighting ended. The operation delivered more than supplies. It delivered lessons. Lessons that would shape military planning for generations. The concept of maintaining continuous high-volume supply networks became a cornerstone of modern warfare. The idea that transportation systems could determine strategic outcomes became accepted military doctrine. The Red Ball Express had demonstrated these principles under combat conditions on a scale never seen before. Its influence extended far beyond the battlefield. Thousands of drivers returned home carrying experiences unlike anything found in civilian life. They had operated one of the largest transportation networks in history. They understood scheduling, maintenance, route management, fleet operations, large-scale cargo movement. Many of those veterans later entered the trucking industry. Some founded transportation companies. Others helped develop freight networks that would reshape American commerce in the decades after the war. The lessons learned on the roads of France eventually found their way onto the highways of America. In that sense, the Red Ball Express did not truly end in 1944. Its legacy continued every time a truck carried cargo across a continent, every time a supply chain connected distant locations, every time logistics transformed movement into economic power. Yet, perhaps the most important legacy belonged to the men who drove the trucks. The majority were African-American soldiers serving in a segregated military. Many returned home to a country that still denied them equal treatment. Yet their contribution could not be erased. They had sustained one of the greatest military advances of the 20th century. They had helped liberate Europe. They had disproven racist assumptions through competence, endurance, and determination. Every convoy became evidence. Every successful delivery became proof. Every mile traveled became a quiet challenge to prejudice. Their role in the Red Ball Express would later contribute to growing pressure for change within the United States military. Only a few years after the war, the process of desegregation began. History was moving forward, and the drivers had helped push it there. Decades later, recognition finally arrived. In 1994, during the 50th anniversary commemorations of World War II, veterans of the Red Ball Express gathered once more. Many were older now. Some walked with canes. Some carried photographs. Some carried memories that had remained vivid for half a century. They spoke not of glory, not of medals, not of fame. They spoke about the roads, the trucks, the exhaustion, the friendships, and the simple determination to keep moving. Again and again, the same theme emerged. They knew their mission mattered, even if few people noticed it at the time. Even if history often focused on the men at the front, they understood that armies moved because someone supplied them, that victories depended on deliveries, that every mile driven brought the war one step closer to its conclusion. Today, military historians almost universally regard the Red Ball Express as one of the most important logistical operations ever conducted, not because it was elegant, not because it was efficient. In many ways, it was neither. It was expensive. It was exhausting. It was chaotic. Vehicles wore out. Fuel vanished at staggering rates. Drivers pushed themselves beyond normal limits. Yet it worked. And in war, results matter more than appearances. The Red Ball Express embodied a uniquely American solution to an enormous problem. If something was insufficient, expand it. If something broke, replace it. If something slowed down, add more resources. The operation succeeded because it combined industrial strength with human determination. Neither alone would have been enough. Together, they became unstoppable. By the time Germany surrendered in May 1945, many German officers had reached a painful conclusion. They had not simply been defeated by Allied armies. They had been defeated by Allied production, Allied transportation, Allied logistics. The Red Ball Express became one of the clearest symbols of that reality. Its final statistics remain astonishing. Hundreds of thousands of tons delivered, thousands of vehicles employed, millions of miles traveled, thousands of drivers involved, 82 continuous days of operation. But numbers alone do not tell the full story. The real achievement was momentum, the ability to keep an army moving, the ability to turn industrial power into battlefield success, the ability to transform supply into strategy. Perhaps the most fitting summary came from a German officer who reportedly watched the convoys pass through Belgium late in the war, as truck after truck disappeared into the distance. He turned to those around him and asked a question that captured the entire dilemma facing Germany. How do you defeat an enemy who has more trucks than you have soldiers? History provided the answer. You don't. The Red Ball Express proved that modern warfare had entered a new age, an age where factories mattered as much as fortresses, where transportation mattered as much as tactics, where logistics became strategy. The convoys eventually disappeared from the roads of France. The engines fell silent. The drivers went home. But their achievement endured, because every mile they drove pushed the Allies closer to victory. Every delivery shortened the war. Every truck helped change the future. And in the end, the roads of Europe carried more than fuel and ammunition. They carried the force that ultimately overwhelmed Nazi Germany, a force measured not only in courage or firepower, but in movement, in supply, in logistics, and in the determination of thousands of exhausted drivers who kept rolling forward when the outcome of a war depended on it.